In a world where hardship and injustice often test our deepest resilience, this story unveils the unbreakable strength of family and the power of love over manipulation. When Jake is confronted by a choice, sacrificing his integrity for a hollow promise or standing firm for his family, he discovers that true power lies in loyalty and courage. As you watch this emotional journey, remember to like, subscribe, and join our community by commenting below. Let's see together how far one father's love can go to protect his family. Stay with us until the end. You won't want to miss a moment. Jake had built his life on structure, determination, and a relentless work ethic that had taken him from a young, ambitious dreamer to a man at the helm of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. His days were meticulously planned, his schedules tight and efficient, each hour accounted for in a life dedicated to progress and success. Yet, despite the accomplishments lining his walls and the wealth accumulated over years of sacrifice, something felt amiss. A quiet void that had always been there, masked by meetings and success, but never completely filled. One evening, as Jake arrived home from another exhausting day, he noticed a figure standing outside his house. She was leaning against the lamppost, her face partially hidden by her hands, and she seemed utterly distraught. Jake's first instinct was to ignore it. His life was strictly private, and he guarded his personal space. However, something about the woman's silent despair tugged at him, compelling him to approach. "Excuse me, miss. Are you okay?" Jake asked, his voice cautious yet gentle. The woman looked up, her face streaked with tears. She was a young black woman, her eyes filled with an exhaustion that was far deeper than physical tiredness. Jake felt a pang of unease as she looked at him, almost as if she recognized him. But her expression wasn't one of familiarity or comfort. It was one of pleading, perhaps even desperation. "Are you Jake?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's brow furrowed. "Yes, I am. Do we know each other?" The woman shook her head slowly, her gaze dropping to the ground. She took a deep, shaky breath, as if gathering her courage. "No, not exactly. My name is Emma. Emma Jackson." There was something in her tone, something that suggested a heavy story lay behind her name. She paused, hesitating, and then finally forced herself to continue. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't urgent, Jake. I've thought about this for years, wondering if there'd ever be a time to tell you." Confusion flickered across Jake's face, but he remained silent, giving her space to speak. "Jake, I didn't come here lightly," she continued, her voice growing steadier. "I came because of Michael, my son." At the mention of a son, Jake's mind immediately leaped to assumptions. Maybe Emma needed financial help, or maybe her son was in trouble. But her next words shattered his initial expectations. "Our son," she whispered, and the world around Jake seemed to slow. For a moment, he just stood there, reeling. His mind raced back to fleeting memories of his past, of a whirlwind romance in college that had ended just as quickly as it began. Emma. He remembered her now, but only vaguely. They had shared something intense, yet brief, something he had buried deep in the recesses of his memory, chalking it up to youthful recklessness. But a son? He had never known. He felt a strange mix of shock, disbelief, and an inexplicable sense of grief for the years he'd never known about his child. "Michael, he's mine?" Jake stammered, his voice barely audible as he tried to process what Emma was telling him. "Yes," she replied, a small nod confirming his worst fear and yet an incredible revelation. "I didn't tell you back then. We were so young, and I didn't think you'd want to be involved. But now," she paused, her voice breaking, and her hand covered her mouth as though the weight of her words was too much to bear. "Michael, he needs you, Jake. He's sick, really sick." Jake's heart twisted at her words, and he felt his own breath hitch. This was no longer about the shock of having a son he never knew existed. This was about a boy, his boy, who was suffering, perhaps fighting for his life. "What's wrong with him?" Jake asked, his voice rough with sudden, urgent concern. Emma took a shuddering breath, and he could see the fear in her eyes, the pain of a mother grappling with a nightmare she couldn't escape. "Michael has a rare liver condition. He's been on the transplant list, but we're running out of time. He's been so strong, but She trailed off, her voice catching on a sob. Without fully realizing it, Jake's hands clenched into fists. A fire was igniting inside him, a fierce, protective force he'd never felt before. He barely knew this boy, and yet, the realization that his own child was suffering felt like a dagger to his heart. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked, his voice firm, his gaze steady. Emma's eyes widened with a glimmer of hope, and for a moment, the pain in her face softened. "The doctors said, they said family members are often the best matches. If you're willing, if you could be tested." "Yes," Jake interrupted, almost instantly. "I'll do it. Anything he needs." Emma nodded, and for the first time that evening, a small, hopeful smile crossed her lips. She looked at him, perhaps seeing in his face the resolve and determination that defined him. But beneath that, there was something more. An awakening of the bond they both hoped he could share with Michael. Over the next few days, Jake's life took an unexpected turn. The tests were scheduled quickly, and each step felt surreal. He hardly knew Michael, yet with every doctor's appointment, every consultation, he felt the weight of fatherhood settling over him. It was strange, yet deeply fulfilling, and as he waited in the hospital halls, he found himself wondering what Michael was like. His favorite books, his dreams, his fears. Finally, the day came when he would meet his son. The hospital room was quiet, sterile, filled with the soft hum of machines. Emma was already there, sitting by Michael's bed, her hand resting on his. As Jake entered, he felt his pulse quicken. Michael was thinner than he had imagined, his skin pale, his eyes tired. But there was a spark there, a hint of resilience that Jake couldn't ignore. "Michael," Emma whispered softly, nudging him awake. "There's someone here who wants to meet you." Michael's gaze flicked up to Jake, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and exhaustion. Jake felt his heart swell, the reality of it all crashing over him. Here was his son, a piece of him that had been missing all these years. "Hi, Michael," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm Jake. I'm your dad." The words felt foreign yet deeply natural, as if they had been waiting inside him all this time. Michael looked at him, studying him for a moment, before offering a faint smile. "Hi, Dad." And in that simple exchange, Jake felt something shift inside him, a fierce, unbreakable bond that he knew would only grow stronger with time. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he wanted to learn, but for now, he was here, and that was all that mattered. Before we continue with this heartwarming story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This is how you can contribute and help us continue bringing meaningful stories about justice and overcoming challenges. Click the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's keep going. Jake hadn't slept much since learning about Michael. Every moment, every heartbeat seemed to carry the weight of the revelation. He'd barely managed to function in his work meetings, and the once rewarding bustle of his office felt strangely hollow. Today was the day the doctors would confirm if he was a viable match for Michael's transplant. Jake sat in the hospital waiting area, his eyes fixated on the linoleum floor, his thoughts racing. Suddenly, a soft voice broke his reverie. "Jake?" He looked up to see Emma, her face weary yet hopeful. She had deep circles under her eyes, a testament to the endless nights spent at Michael's side, but her posture was steady, as if a small piece of her strength came from Jake's presence. "Emma," he replied, offering her a faint smile. "How's he doing?" Emma sighed, looking down the hall toward Michael's room. "He's holding on, but it's getting harder for him. He doesn't show it, but I can see it. Every day, he's a little weaker." Jake swallowed hard, his chest tightening. "And the doctors? Did they say anything?" Emma glanced at him, her eyes shimmering with a mix of fear and hope. "They said the results are coming soon. But Jake," she hesitated, "if you're not a match, it could be months, maybe even longer, before we find a donor." Jake nodded, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy shroud. He was silent for a moment, absorbing her words before finally asking, Can I see him?" She gave a soft nod, gesturing toward the door to Michael's room. "Of course." Jake entered the room quietly. Michael was lying in bed, his face turned toward the window, his thin frame dwarfed by the large hospital bed. The machines around him beeped softly, a constant reminder of his fragile state. Jake took a deep breath, approaching slowly. "Hey, Michael," he said gently. Michael turned to face him, a tired but genuine smile breaking across his face. "Hey, Dad." The word felt heavy, yet beautiful, coming from Michael's lips. Jake swallowed, his voice thick with emotion. "How are you feeling?" Michael shrugged, attempting a nonchalant look that was belied by the dark circles under his eyes. "I'm okay, just a bit tired." Jake pulled a chair beside his bed, sitting down and leaning forward, his hands clasped. "Listen, Michael, I'm doing everything I can to make sure you get the help you need. I'm here for you." Michael's eyes softened, his gaze meeting Jake's. "Thank you, Dad. I mean, it's strange. I never thought I'd meet you, and now you're here and you're helping me." Jake felt a lump rise in his throat, and he cleared it with a slight cough. It's the least I can do, Michael. I should have been there for you all these years. I didn't know, but now that I do, I'll do anything for you." Just then, a nurse entered, holding a clipboard. "Excuse me, Mr. Jake. The doctor would like to see you." Jake stood, looking at Michael with a reassuring smile. "I'll be back soon, okay? Just need to speak with the doctor." Michael nodded, giving him a small wave. "Okay, don't be long." Jake followed the nurse down the hall, his heart pounding with every step. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow, the antiseptic smell filling his nostrils. When he reached the doctor's office, he found Emma already there, her hands wringing nervously in her lap. The doctor, a serious-looking man with silver-rimmed glasses, looked at Jake, his expression neutral. "Mr. Jake, we have the results." Jake held his breath, his hands cold with sweat. "And?" The doctor glanced between him and Emma before finally speaking. "Unfortunately, Mr. Jake, you're not a match." The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered, gripping the back of a chair for support. I'm not." His voice was barely above a whisper. Emma let out a strangled gasp, her face going pale. But there must be some mistake." The doctor shook his head, his tone solemn but firm. "I'm sorry. We tested thoroughly. There's no match. I wish there was more I could say, but as it stands, Michael will have to remain on the waiting list." Jake felt a surge of desperation, his mind racing. "Is there anything else I can do?" The doctor sighed, his gaze sympathetic but resolute. "We'll continue to monitor his condition. For now, the best we can do is hope for a match to become available." Jake turned to Emma, her face a picture of despair. He reached out, taking her hand, and for a moment, they both found comfort in each other's presence, united by the same silent plea. "Emma," he said softly, his voice laced with determination, "we're not giving up. I'll find a way, whatever it takes." Emma looked at him, her eyes wide with fragile hope. "But Jake, how? What can we possibly do?" He squeezed her hand, his resolve hardening. "There must be something. People get desperate for things in situations like this. Maybe there's someone we can reach out to, resources I haven't thought of yet." The doctor cleared his throat gently, a hint of caution in his gaze. "I understand your desire to help, Mr. Jake, but I must advise against taking any unconventional routes. Such decisions can lead to complications." Jake's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the doctor. "Complications? My son is fighting for his life. Complications don't matter if I can find a way to help him." The doctor sighed. "I understand, but as his physician, I have a duty to ensure the medical and ethical standards are upheld." Jake bit back a retort, realizing he was losing control. "Thank you, doctor," he said curtly, before turning back to Emma. "Let's go." As they walked down the hall together, Emma's hand slipped into his, a small comfort in the cold, clinical world they were navigating. She leaned in, her voice a whisper. "What are you planning, Jake?" He looked at her, his eyes fierce. "I don't know yet, Emma, but I'll find someone. Some way. No matter the cost." They stopped outside Michael's door, and Emma looked at him with a small, sad smile. "Thank you, Jake. I never expected this from you. But you're here, And that means everything. Jake returned her gaze, feeling a strange, bittersweet ache in his chest. It's my responsibility, Emma. I may not have been there before, but I'm here now, and I won't let him down. They stepped back into the room, and Michael looked up at them, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Did the doctor say anything?" he asked, his voice hopeful but hesitant. Jake forced a smile, taking a seat beside him. "We're still working on it, son. But don't you worry, we'll find a way." Jake hadn't realized how strong his resolve had grown until he left the hospital that evening. He didn't just want to help Michael, he needed to. As he drove back to his penthouse, his mind raced through possible solutions. But his thoughts were interrupted by a name that had haunted his past and, unwittingly, might have a solution. Dr. Harold McIntyre, an influential physician whose reputation preceded him. Back in his office, Jake made the call. McIntyre was a name often whispered among those who could afford the unreachable solutions, but only those willing to bend the rules could truly benefit. "McIntyre here," answered a voice on the other end, gruff and short-tempered. "Harold, this is Jake Riley," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Jake," McIntyre said slowly, as if tasting the name. Well, to what do I owe this call after so many years?" Jake swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "I need your help. My son needs a liver transplant. He doesn't have time to wait, and I've been told you know things. Or people." McIntyre chuckled, the sound laced with irony. "You sound desperate, Jake. But you know, desperation is a powerful currency." Jake bristled at McIntyre's tone, but reminded himself why he was here. "I'm willing to pay whatever it takes, Harold. Just tell me you can help." There was a brief silence, and Jake could practically see McIntyre's smirk through the phone. "Come by my office tomorrow at noon. And remember, nothing I do comes for free. Not in money, and certainly not in morality." The call ended abruptly, leaving Jake to stare at his phone, his stomach twisting with unease. The next day, he arrived at McIntyre's private office, a sleek, almost clinical space that felt more like the lair of a businessman than a doctor. McIntyre, a man in his late 60s with a sharp gaze and a meticulously groomed appearance, gestured for Jake to sit. Jake Riley, he began with a small, knowing smile, the prodigy of corporate success, now brought to his knees by a mere mortal problem. Jake forced himself to remain calm, meeting McIntyre's gaze evenly. "Harold, I didn't come here for pleasantries. Can you help or not?" McIntyre leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. "Your son. He's a young man, full of potential. It would be a shame to see that potential wasted." But he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This isn't a matter of simply buying a solution, Jake. This will cost you something far greater." Jake narrowed his eyes, his fists clenching involuntarily. "What do you mean by that?" McIntyre gave a small shrug, the corner of his mouth twisting into a cruel smile. "I'll give you access to an underground network. It's not legal, not safe, but they get things done. Liver matches, expedited procedures, even access to doctors who specialize in unconventional transplants." A chill ran down Jake's spine, and he felt his pulse quicken. "Underground network? Harold, this is my son's life. I don't want him involved in something that could harm him." McIntyre's smile widened. "Ah, but Jake, you said you'd do anything, didn't you?" Jake hesitated, the weight of McIntyre's words pressing down on him. "Anything within reason," he replied through gritted teeth. McIntyre laughed, the sound hollow and dark. "Reason? Desperation has no reason, my friend. It only has results." He tapped a button on his desk, and a door opened to reveal a small, dimly lit room filled with files and medical records stacked high. "These," he said, gesturing with pride, "are people who had no choice but to come to me. Some succeeded. Others, well, you get the idea." Jake looked at the room, feeling the weight of the stories contained in those files. Each one represented a life, a family, a decision made out of despair. The thought of Michael becoming another file in that room filled him with dread. "I need guarantees, Harold. I won't put Michael's life at risk just for a possibility." McIntyre's eyes gleamed with a cruel amusement. The only guarantee I can give you, Jake, is that every day you wait, your son's chances dwindle. But you're a smart man. Surely you understand the stakes." Jake looked away, fighting the urge to lash out. "Fine, just tell me how this works." McIntyre's smile disappeared, replaced by a serious, businesslike expression. "We start with payment. You'll pay up front, $500,000, non-refundable. Then, I'll connect you with a group that sources organs from, shall we say, unconventional places." Jake's stomach twisted with disgust, but he forced himself to listen. After the payment, McIntyre continued, "You wait. We can't control timing, but you'll be notified if a match is found. And remember, Jake, this is all off the books. No refunds, no guarantees, and definitely no moral ground to stand on." Jake's fists clenched, his face growing pale. "And if I refuse?" McIntyre smirked. "Then you walk away, back to your son's hospital bed, and wait for a miracle." "But miracles, Jake, are few and far between." Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He felt like he was staring down a dark, endless chasm. The thought of putting Michael through this was unbearable, yet the idea of losing him felt even worse. He looked McIntyre straight in the eyes, his voice steady. "I'll think about it." McIntyre shrugged nonchalantly. "Do what you want, but don't take too long. Time is running out." As Jake left the office, the air felt thick, oppressive. The bright city lights outside seemed harsh and distant, a cruel reminder of the life he'd built. All his money, his power, none of it mattered now. His son's life was in danger, and the only man who seemed to have an answer was a man with no soul. Later that night, he sat in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He barely noticed Emma calling until he heard her voice breaking through the silence. "Jake?" Emma's voice was tentative. Are you okay? Did you find any leads?" Jake clenched his jaw, choosing his words carefully. "I spoke to someone who might be able to help, but it's complicated." Emma sensed the tension in his voice. "Complicated how?" "Jake, I just want Michael to be safe. I don't want him involved in something dangerous." Jake turned to look at her, his gaze heavy with determination. "Emma, if this was your only chance to save him, wouldn't you take it?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly. "Of course I would. But, Jake, please promise me that whatever you do, you'll put Michael's safety first." Jake felt a wave of guilt crash over him, but managed a solemn nod. "I promise, Emma. No matter what, I won't let him down." They sat in silence, the weight of their shared desperation filling the room. Outside, the city lights shimmered, indifferent to the lives entangled within its towering structures. Jake knew he was teetering on the edge of a choice he might never be able to undo. But for his son, he would do anything. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Jake wrestled with his decision, the pressure of McIntyre's offer bearing down on him. But the thought of involving Michael in something so dangerous was almost unbearable. However, he couldn't ignore that, day by day, Michael's condition was visibly worsening. Jake decided to visit him again at the hospital, hoping to find some solace in being near him, to understand the boy he'd only just met but now felt deeply responsible for. When Jake entered the room, Michael was awake, his eyes focused on the ceiling, lost in thought. Emma was sitting by his bedside, reading to him from an old book with pages that had clearly been turned many times. She looked up as Jake stepped in, a warm but tired smile crossing her face. "Hey, Jake," she greeted softly, closing the book. "Hi, Emma," he replied, his voice low. "Hey, Michael, how are you feeling?" Michael managed a small smile, shifting slightly in bed. "Still here, I guess. Not much else to say." Jake pulled a chair closer, sitting beside them. He studied Michael's face, the quiet resilience in his expression. "I'm here for you, Michael. I'm doing everything I can." Michael looked away, a faint sadness crossing his face. "I know you are, and it means a lot. I never thought I'd meet you, let alone have you here like this." Jake felt a pang of guilt. "I should have been there sooner. I didn't know. But if I had, I would have been there." Michael turned back to him, his eyes piercing. Do you really think things would have been different if you knew? Jake blinked, slightly taken aback by the question. He didn't know how to answer without making promises he couldn't keep. I'd like to think they would have been, but now that I know, I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together. Emma reached out, placing a gentle hand on Michael's arm. Your dad means it, Michael. He's been trying everything he can to help. Michael's gaze softened as he looked at her, then back at Jake. I believe you. I really do. It's just, sometimes, it feels like nothing will really change. A silence settled over them, thick and heavy. Jake felt the weight of those words in his bones. Before he could respond, a nurse entered, breaking the quiet. Mr. Riley, Ms. Jackson, she said softly, giving Michael a warm smile. I have someone here to see you all. He's been hoping to meet Michael. Jake exchanged a puzzled glance with Emma before nodding. Sure, let him in. Moments later, a man in his 40s stepped into the room. He wore a tailored suit, his demeanor confident yet surprisingly warm. He held a small bouquet of flowers and a wrapped book under his arm. His eyes lit up as he looked at Michael. Hi there, the man said with a kind smile. You must be Michael. Michael blinked, surprise crossing his face. Yeah, and you are? The man laughed, setting the flowers on the bedside table. I'm Paul. I work with your dad. He's told me a lot about you. Jake raised an eyebrow, his surprise evident. Paul, I didn't know you'd be coming. Paul shrugged, his eyes twinkling with a warm friendliness. I thought it might be nice for Michael to meet a few more people who care about him. We're all rooting for him, Jake. It's the least I could do. Michael's face softened as he looked at the flowers, a flicker of genuine happiness sparking in his tired eyes. Thanks, Mr. Paul. It's nice to meet you. Paul chuckled. Just call me Paul. And look, he handed Michael the wrapped book. I heard you like reading, so I thought I'd bring you one of my favorites. Kept me company through some tough times. Michael unwrapped it slowly, his eyes lighting up as he saw the cover. It was a well-worn copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, the edges frayed, and the cover faded from years of handling. Wow, Michael said softly, tracing the title with his fingers. Thank you, Paul. Really? Jake watched the exchange, his heart warming slightly. Paul's presence was a welcome relief, a reminder that they weren't entirely alone in this. It was small gestures like this that reminded him of the kindness in the world. Emma, too, seemed moved. She glanced at Jake, her eyes full of gratitude, before looking back at Paul. Thank you for coming, Paul. It means a lot. Paul nodded, his gaze shifting to Jake. You know, Jake, if there's anything you need, support, resources, don't hesitate to ask. This is family we're talking about. Jake felt a surge of emotion, his voice thick. Thank you, Paul. Really, that means a lot. They spent the next hour talking, laughter occasionally breaking the tension as Paul shared stories from his own youth and life. Michael listened intently, sometimes laughing, sometimes asking questions. It was a precious moment of normalcy, a brief escape from the reality of the hospital walls. After Paul left, the room felt quieter, yet lighter. Michael held the book close to his chest, his expression thoughtful. I like him, he said softly, looking at Jake. Your friend. He's nice. Jake smiled, a rare sense of peace settling over him. He's a good man, and he meant it. If you ever need anything, he's there. Michael nodded, his fingers running over the book's worn cover. It's just nice to have people around. I haven't really had that. Just Mom and me, mostly. Emma squeezed Michael's hand, her eyes shining. Well, now you have more than just me. You have your dad, too, and people who care. Jake watched the tenderness between them, feeling an inexplicable sense of gratitude. And I'm here for the long haul, Michael. You won't be alone again. Michael looked at him, a hesitant smile tugging at his lips. I believe you, Dad. The warmth of that moment was interrupted by the sudden sound of the door swinging open. McIntyre entered, his expression cold and calculated as he took in the scene. Jake's heart dropped at the sight of him, feeling the peaceful atmosphere of the room shift immediately. Mr. Riley, McIntyre said, his voice slicing through the room, I was told you'd be here. We need to discuss some details, preferably in private. Jake's expression hardened, his jaw clenching. We're with family, Dr. McIntyre. Anything you have to say, you can say here. McIntyre raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting between Jake and Emma, then landing on Michael. Very well. I assume, then, that everyone here is aware of certain options. Emma's face went pale, her eyes widening as she looked between Jake and McIntyre. What is he talking about, Jake? Jake shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening into a fist. Dr. McIntyre specializes in unconventional treatments, ones that might help Michael, but they come with risks. Michael's eyes grew wide, and he looked at McIntyre with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Risks? What do you mean? McIntyre smirked slightly, his tone almost patronizing. Let's just say that life-saving procedures often come at a price, young man. A price that most aren't willing to pay. Emma shot Jake a horrified look. Jake, you're not. You wouldn't. Jake met her gaze, his expression filled with both guilt and determination. Emma, I'm trying to give Michael a chance. I won't let him slip away if there's something I can do. Emma looked back at McIntyre, her face filled with revulsion. And what exactly do you offer, Doctor? McIntyre's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. Let's just say I offer solutions to problems that seem unsolvable, but only for those who are willing to go the extra mile. Emma looked at Jake, her eyes pleading. Jake, please, think about this. We don't need to go down that road. There must be another way. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him. I'm doing this for Michael. I'm not willing to lose him. Michael looked between them, his face conflicted. Dad, I don't want you to get hurt because of me. Jake leaned forward, placing a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder. I'll do anything for you, Michael. Anything. After McIntyre's unsettling visit, the tension between Jake and Emma grew palpable. She couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest, a gnawing fear that the path Jake seemed willing to take would only lead to heartache. She had seen enough hardship in her life and knew that some solutions came with irreversible consequences. Jake, however, seemed unfazed, driven by a singular determination to save Michael, regardless of the cost. That evening, they sat in a dimly lit hospital lounge, the muffled sounds of machines and the hum of the fluorescent lights amplifying the silence between them. Jake was hunched forward, his elbows on his knees, while Emma sat across from him, her gaze steady and unyielding. Jake, she began softly, breaking the silence. I understand you're desperate, but I need you to hear me. Really hear me. Jake looked up, a flicker of frustration in his eyes. Emma, I am hearing you, but are you hearing me? This is our son's life on the line. I can't just sit around and wait. Emma shook her head, her jaw tightening. And you think I don't feel the same? I've been fighting for him for years, Jake. But there's a line. There's a line we shouldn't cross. Jake clenched his fists, his voice rising with the urgency that had been brewing in him. Emma, I haven't been in his life, but that doesn't mean I don't care. I'm not willing to lose him. Not if there's something, anything, I can do to prevent it. Her eyes softened for a moment, but her voice remained firm. And what happens if you get involved with people like McIntyre? What kind of example does that set for Michael? What happens to us if you get tangled up in something dark, something you can't walk away from? Jake exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You think I haven't thought about that? I'm not. I'm not blind to the risks, Emma, but I don't know what else to do. Emma placed her hand gently on his, her gaze softening. I know you care, Jake. I see it. But you have to remember that sometimes the most dangerous thing we can do is act out of desperation. Jake's shoulders slumped, her words settling heavily in the pit of his stomach. For the first time in days, he felt the doubt creeping in, the fear that maybe, just maybe, he was making a mistake. They sat in silence, neither of them willing to continue the argument. Eventually, they returned to Michael's room, where he was awake, staring absently out the window. His face lit up when he saw them, but Jake couldn't help but notice the weariness in his eyes, the faint pallor that seemed to deepen with each passing day. Hey, you too, Michael greeted, his voice softer than usual. "You both look like you've seen a ghost." Jake forced a smile, moving to sit beside him. "Just been a long day, that's all." Michael gave him a knowing look. "You don't have to pretend, Dad. I know things aren't good." Emma took Michael's hand, her thumb gently tracing circles on his skin. "We're just trying to figure out how to make things better for you, Michael. That's all." He nodded, his eyes flicking between them. "Whatever you do, just please promise me you'll stay safe. I don't want either of you to get hurt because of me." Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight. "We'll do our best, son. We're here for you, no matter what." Just then, Dr. Thompson, Michael's primary doctor, entered the room, his expression grave. He gave Jake and Emma a polite nod before turning to Michael, checking his vitals and noting the readings with a frown. "Michael, we need to talk about the next steps," Dr. Thompson began, his voice gentle but firm. "Your condition, it's getting more complicated. I'm afraid we may need to consider more intensive treatment options." Michael looked away, a hint of resignation in his eyes. "I figured as much." Emma's grip tightened on his hand. "Doctor, what are you saying? Is there any chance of a new match soon?" Dr. Thompson hesitated, looking between the three of them. "I'm afraid that's uncertain. The list is long, and matches can take months, sometimes even years. But," he cleared his throat, his gaze shifting uncomfortably, "there may be alternative options. Experimental procedures, high-risk operations that are unconventional." Jake and Emma exchanged a glance, their minds immediately flashing to McIntyre. Dr. Thompson's discomfort was evident, and he seemed to be carefully choosing his words, aware of the sensitive nature of his suggestion. "Doctor," Jake said, his voice low and intense, "are you talking about something outside of the standard medical practices?" Dr. Thompson's gaze sharpened, a flicker of understanding passing over his features. "Mr. Riley, I can't endorse any particular alternative. But let's just say that some families choose to explore options that aren't readily available in the usual channels." Emma's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "No, absolutely not." Jake shot her a look, his frustration bubbling up again. "Emma, just listen to him." Dr. Thompson looked between them, clearly caught in the crossfire. "I understand the concerns, Ms. Jackson. I just wanted to make you aware that, while traditional avenues are limited, some families choose to take more assertive action. But I urge you to consider all factors before making any decisions." Michael, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't want any of you doing anything dangerous for me. Please, just let things be. I'll be okay." Emma turned to him, tears in her eyes. "Michael, we can't just sit by and watch. We're not giving up on you." He smiled weakly, his gaze filled with a resigned determination. "But maybe it's time I stopped fighting. I'm tired, Mom. Really tired." The words shattered the tension in the room, leaving only a painful, hollow silence. Emma let out a choked sob, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. "No, Michael," she whispered, her voice broken. "Don't say that. You're stronger than this." Jake felt his chest tighten, his heart hammering painfully against his ribs. He took Michael's hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Listen to me, Michael. We're not giving up. Not now, not ever. You don't have to fight alone. We're right here with you." Michael looked at him, his eyes misty but full of gratitude. "Thank you, Dad. But I don't want you or Mom doing anything you'll regret. Promise me you'll think before you act." Jake nodded, his voice choked with emotion. "I promise, Michael. We'll be careful." Dr. Thompson placed a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. "I'll continue to monitor your condition closely. And remember, you're not alone. We're all rooting for you, Michael." As Dr. Thompson left, Jake and Emma sat beside Michael, a silent pact forming between them. Jake knew that, regardless of Emma's reluctance, he couldn't stand by and let Michael suffer. But he also felt the weight of Michael's plea, the desperate hope that they wouldn't lose themselves in the process of trying to save him. That night, as Jake lay awake in his apartment, McIntyre's offer loomed in his mind. He had promised Michael to be careful, yet every fiber of his being urged him to act. The clock was ticking, and every passing second felt like it was bringing them closer to a decision he could never take back. The pressure was beginning to eat away at Jake. Every waking moment, he wrestled with the decision before him, his mind a battleground of desperation, fear, and the relentless ache of wanting to save Michael. He knew the risks, understood the path he was considering could change everything, irreversibly. One evening, he found himself back in the hospital lounge, staring out the window as the lights of the city glowed faintly against the darkening sky. Emma entered, her step soft, her face weary from yet another day by Michael's side. She sat beside him, letting the silence linger between them. "Jake," she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You look exhausted." He gave a short, humorless laugh, rubbing his hands over his face. "I haven't been able to sleep, Emma. I just keep thinking, what if this is it? What if this choice determines everything?" Emma's gaze softened, and she placed a hand gently on his arm. "I know this is tearing you apart, but we have to remember why we're doing this. For Michael." Jake looked down at her hand, his jaw tightening as the weight of her words sank in. "I'm scared, Emma," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "Scared that no matter what I choose, I'll end up losing him, or myself." Emma's fingers curled around his arm, her grip firm and steady. "You don't have to go through this alone, Jake. We're in this together. Whatever we decide, we'll do it for Michael. But please, don't lose yourself." Michael wouldn't want that. Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "I just can't shake the feeling that every minute we waste is a minute closer to losing him." Emma's eyes filled with tears, her own fears slipping through. "I feel it too, Jake. Every single day. But I don't want to lose you either. I can't watch both of you slip away." Jake nodded, the battle within him shifting, but not subsiding. He looked away, the darkness of the city reflecting his inner turmoil. "I feel like I'm failing as a father. I just met him, and already I'm terrified I'll let him down." Emma placed her other hand over his, her touch warm and grounding. "Jake, he doesn't see you as a failure. He sees you here, trying your hardest. And that matters to him." As they sat in the quiet, a figure approached, a young woman with a kind but cautious expression. She was a hospital counselor, and from her gentle gaze, it was clear she had sensed their struggle. "Mr. Riley, Ms. Jackson," she said softly, "I'm sorry to intrude, but I thought you both might want someone to talk to. My name is Lisa." Emma smiled weakly, glancing at Jake. "I think we could use that. Couldn't we, Jake?" Jake hesitated, but finally nodded. "Yeah, talking might help." Lisa motioned them to a quieter corner, where they sat in a small, comfortable nook, away from the bustling sounds of the hospital. "I can't imagine the weight you're both carrying," Lisa began gently. "But sometimes, sharing our fears can help us understand them better." Jake looked down, his hands clenched tightly together. "It's just, everything feels impossible. I want to save my son, and I don't care what it takes. But I also don't want to cross lines I can't come back from." Lisa nodded, her expression empathetic. "Sometimes, in our darkest moments, we're faced with choices that seem impossible, and it's natural to feel torn. What matters is what you believe you can live with after all of this." Emma's voice was soft, her gaze distant. "We just want him to be okay, to live." Lisa turned to her, her voice kind but steady. "Emma, what do you think Michael would want for both of you in this situation?" Emma took a shaky breath, her eyes glistening. "He'd want us to be safe. He doesn't want us to hurt ourselves for him. But that doesn't make it any easier." Jake swallowed, his throat tight. "And if this choice meant saving him, but at a cost, how do we know if it's worth it?" Lisa considered his question carefully. "Jake, that's a question only you and Emma can answer. But remember, every decision we make changes us in some way. The goal is to make a choice you can live with, for Michael's sake and for yours." Jake nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I just don't want to feel like I failed him." Emma leaned against his shoulder, her hand squeezing his. "We're doing everything we can, Jake. He knows that." The counselor's words stayed with Jake long after they'd left the hospital that night. Every word replayed in his mind, pushing him to confront his own fears, his desperation, and his love for Michael. As he drove home, he glanced over at Emma, who had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, her face peaceful despite the turmoil they were both enduring. Later that night, lying in bed, Jake's mind was far from restful. He found himself replaying moments with Michael. Each laugh, every smile, the moments of clarity when Michael's eyes showed the strength he was barely holding onto. Jake realized that, no matter what happened, he had to honor that strength. He had to make decisions that Michael would understand, even if he was no longer there to explain them. The next morning, as Jake sat by Michael's bedside, the boy stirred awake, offering a tired but genuine smile. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kiddo," Jake replied, leaning forward. "How are you feeling today?" Michael shrugged, his gaze shifting to the window. "Same as always, I guess. But I've been thinking." Jake's heart skipped, sensing the gravity in Michael's tone. "Thinking about what?" Michael looked down at his hands, his voice barely a whisper. "About what's next. I don't want you or Mom to go through something dangerous or lose yourselves trying to save me. I don't want to be the reason you get hurt." Jake reached out, taking his hand, the warmth of his grip grounding them both. "Michael, don't worry about us. All we want is for you to get better." Michael met his gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet strength. "But I want you both to be okay too, Dad. You and Mom have a life outside of all this. Don't let it slip away because of me." Jake felt a lump form in his throat, his hand tightening around Michael's. "I can't just give up, Michael. You're my son. I'll do whatever it takes." Michael offered him a sad smile. "I know, and that means more to me than you'll ever know. But promise me you'll think carefully. Don't lose yourself for me, okay?" Jake nodded, a mixture of pride and sorrow filling his chest. "I promise, son." The two sat together, a fragile peace settling over them. In that quiet moment, Jake felt a new resolve form, one that honored both his love for Michael and his desire to do right by him, no matter what path he chose. The days dragged on, and the strain of Michael's condition weighed heavily on all of them. Emma and Jake continued their silent vigil by Michael's bedside, each of them carrying a mix of worry and desperation. But one afternoon, during a routine checkup, Dr. Thompson entered with a glimmer of news that immediately lifted the somber mood in the room. "Mr. Riley, Ms. Jackson," Dr. Thompson began, his tone reserved yet hopeful. "We might have some good news." Jake and Emma exchanged a look, barely daring to hope. "What is it, Doctor?" Jake asked, his voice almost a whisper. Dr. Thompson offered a small, encouraging smile. "There's been an unexpected development on the transplant list. Another young patient, who was on the list for a liver transplant, has recently improved and may no longer need it. This could mean that Michael's position might advance." Emma's eyes widened, her hand instinctively reaching for Jake's arm. "You mean he could be closer to a match?" The doctor nodded. "It's possible. We're waiting on final confirmation, but this could happen within the next few days. If everything aligns, Michael might receive a transplant sooner than expected." A mixture of disbelief and cautious optimism filled the room. Jake felt a surge of hope, his heart racing with the possibility that they might finally see an end to this nightmare. "Oh my God," Emma breathed, her face lighting up with a rare, unguarded smile. She turned to Michael, who had been quietly listening, his eyes widening with tentative excitement. "Did you hear that, Michael?" she said, her voice trembling. "This could be it. This could really be it." Michael looked at her, then at Jake, his own face beginning to mirror their relief. That sounds amazing." Jake knelt beside him, taking his son's hand in both of his. "See, son? We told you we wouldn't give up. This could be our chance." Michael nodded, his smile growing, though there was a faint shadow of disbelief. "It almost sounds too good to be true. But I want to believe it." Dr. Thompson placed a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. "It's okay to believe in it, Michael. This isn't a guarantee, but it's a real possibility, and we'll keep you updated on every step." After the doctor left, the room seemed brighter, filled with the cautious joy that had eluded them for so long. Emma reached for Jake's hand, her eyes shining with grateful tears. "Jake," she murmured, barely able to contain her relief. I can't believe this. I was starting to think. Jake squeezed her hand, his own eyes misty. I know. Me too. It's like a lifeline. They turned to Michael, who lay back against his pillow, visibly more relaxed. He let out a deep sigh, as if releasing the weight he had carried all this time. Maybe I'll actually get to leave this place someday, he murmured, a hopeful smile creeping across his face. Jake laughed softly, ruffling Michael's hair. More than that, we'll take you anywhere you want to go. We'll make up for all this time. Michael's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Anywhere? Emma smiled, leaning in. Anywhere. As soon as you're out of here, we'll go on the biggest adventure you can imagine. For the rest of the afternoon, they let themselves dream. The three of them talked about plans, places they would visit, things they would do. They envisioned beaches, mountains, open roads, and endless laughter. It was a balm to their hearts, a glimpse of normalcy that they hadn't felt in so long. But later that night, as the hospital quieted down, Dr. Thompson returned with a look that immediately made Jake's stomach drop. Emma sensed the change as well, her face tensing as she looked up at the doctor. Dr. Thompson, is everything all right? She asked, her voice laced with dread. The doctor hesitated, his gaze filled with regret. I'm so sorry. There's been a complication with the other patient's case. Their condition has worsened, and they will require the transplant after all. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in like stones. The brief glimmer of hope that had filled their hearts was extinguished in an instant, leaving a hollow emptiness in its wake. Emma covered her mouth, her shoulders slumping as the devastation hit her. No, this can't be happening. Jake's fists clenched, his face hardening as he fought to contain the anger and despair that threatened to overwhelm him. Doctor, isn't there anything else we can do? Dr. Thompson shook his head, his voice apologetic but firm. I wish there were, Mr. Riley, but as of now, we're back to where we started. Michael's position on the list hasn't changed. Michael, who had been listening quietly, exhaled slowly, his expression calm yet resigned. It's okay, Dr. Thompson. I kind of expected this. Emma turned to him, her face etched with grief. Michael, don't say that. We had hope. We were so close. Michael offered her a small, sad smile. I know, Mom, but I don't want to keep getting my hopes up. It hurts too much. Jake took a shaky breath, the pain of seeing his son's resolve shattered filling him with rage and frustration. He turned to Dr. Thompson, his voice tense. There must be something else. We can't just accept this. The doctor looked at him, a deep sympathy in his eyes. Mr. Riley, I understand how difficult this is, but we're doing everything in our power. We have to believe that the right match will come. Jake's fists unclenched, and he nodded slowly, though the frustration lingered in his gaze. Thank you, Doctor. After Dr. Thompson left, the silence in the room was stifling. Emma reached for Michael's hand, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, honey. I really thought this was it. Michael gently squeezed her hand, his face calm but weary. It's okay, Mom. I've gotten used to waiting. I'll be all right. Jake looked at his son, his heart breaking at the quiet strength Michael was forced to show. He could barely contain the grief and helplessness that coursed through him, but he knew he had to be strong for Michael's sake. We're still here, Michael, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We're not going anywhere. We'll keep fighting. Michael managed a small nod, though his expression was one of exhaustion and acceptance. Thank you, Dad. That's all I need. Just to know you're here. As the night wore on, Jake and Emma stayed by Michael's side, each of them grappling with their own fears and heartbreak. The taste of hope had been so close, so tangible, only to be ripped away. And as the shadows deepened around them, they each felt the weight of that loss, knowing that this battle was far from over. The next morning, as Jake sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, nursing a cup of cold coffee, he felt the weight of defeat pressing down on him. The false hope from the previous day had left him raw, his nerves frayed and his mind clouded with frustration. He was desperate, and that desperation was becoming a fertile ground for reckless decisions. Just as he was lost in thought, a familiar, unwelcome voice broke through his reverie. Jake Riley, sulking in a hospital cafeteria? That's a sight I never thought I'd see. McIntyre's voice dripped with a mocking edge, his cold gaze studying Jake's weary expression. Jake looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here, McIntyre?" McIntyre smiled, a thin, predatory smirk, as he pulled a chair across from Jake and sat down uninvited. "I heard about your little setback. The transplant list, it's a merciless thing, isn't it?" Jake clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the coffee cup. "It's none of your business," McIntyre shrugged, his eyes gleaming with a hint of satisfaction. "Come now, Jake. We both know you wouldn't be sitting here, defeated, if there weren't still options on the table." "Options I can offer you," Jake scoffed, leaning back, his gaze steely. "Options? Like the ones you flaunt to people who are desperate enough to listen?" McIntyre leaned forward, his voice low and measured. "Exactly. Because I know desperation, Jake. I know what people are willing to do when they have no other choice. And you, my friend, are running out of choices." Jake's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "What you're offering, it's a dangerous game, McIntyre. And I won't put Michael in harm's way." McIntyre laughed softly, an unsettling sound that sent a chill down Jake's spine. "You think you're protecting him by clinging to the moral high ground? Jake, if you truly cared about your son's life, you'd be willing to do whatever it takes." The words stung, hitting a raw nerve. Jake looked away, trying to hold on to his composure. "You're talking about him like he's some bargaining chip. He's my son. He deserves more than whatever it is you're offering." McIntyre's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "This isn't about what he deserves, Jake. It's about what you're willing to do. How much are you willing to risk for him?" Jake took a deep, shuddering breath, the weight of McIntyre's words pressing down on him. "I won't lose myself, McIntyre. Not for you, not for anyone." McIntyre's eyes gleamed with a twisted sense of amusement. "You say that now, but desperation is a powerful thing. And the longer you sit here, the closer you come to realizing that." Jake stared at him, a simmering anger boiling just beneath the surface. "Why are you so invested in this? What's in it for you?" McIntyre's smile was cruel, his gaze cold. "Simple. I've built a reputation on solving impossible problems. And watching a man like you, so righteous, so convinced of his own integrity, fall to the reality of desperation, well, let's just say it's satisfying." Jake felt his blood run cold, a wave of nausea washing over him. "You're a sick man, McIntyre." McIntyre shrugged, entirely unfazed. "Perhaps, but I get results. Think it over, Jake. The offer still stands." He rose, his gaze lingering on Jake with a dark satisfaction. "I'll be here whenever you're ready to be honest with yourself." As McIntyre left, Jake's fists unclenched, his entire body trembling with a mix of anger and shame. He knew the man was right in one respect. His desperation was growing, but he couldn't bear the thought of involving someone as twisted as McIntyre in Michael's life. Later that evening, Jake returned to Michael's room, still reeling from the encounter. Emma was there, holding Michael's hand, a tired smile on her face as she murmured softly to him. She looked up as Jake entered, her smile fading slightly as she noticed the tension in his expression. "Jake," she said, her tone cautious. "What's wrong?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I ran into McIntyre again." Emma's face fell, her expression immediately clouded with concern. "Jake, please tell me you didn't listen to him." He shook his head, though the doubt lingered in his eyes. "I didn't make any promises, Emma, but he knows. He knows exactly what buttons to push." Emma's hand tightened around Michael's, her voice filled with urgency. "Jake, that man is dangerous. He doesn't care about Michael or any of us. All he wants is to manipulate you." Michael, who had been quietly listening, looked between them, his gaze filled with worry. "Dad, who is this McIntyre?" Jake looked at him, the conflict evident in his expression. "He's someone who claims to have a way to help. But it's dangerous, Michael. It's not worth the risk. Michael's face was a mix of fear and sadness. But if he could help, why wouldn't we try? Emma turned to him, her voice soft but firm. Michael, sometimes, people like McIntyre only pretend to help. They don't care about the outcome. They only care about what they can get from people like us. Jake nodded, his expression hardening. Your mom's right, Michael. There are people who see our pain as an opportunity for their own gain. And I don't want to give him that satisfaction. Michael looked down, his expression thoughtful. But I don't want you both to keep hurting for me. I'd rather see you both safe, even if it means waiting. Emma's face softened, and she leaned in, placing a gentle hand on his cheek. Michael, you are worth every fight. We would go to the ends of the earth to see you well. But we won't let someone like McIntyre take advantage of us. Jake took a deep breath, his voice steadying as he met Michael's gaze. And we won't let him decide how this ends. We'll find another way, Michael. I promise. Michael managed a small smile, though the shadows in his eyes revealed his own fears. Thank you. I don't want to lose you both trying to save me. They sat together in silence, each of them lost in thought. The quiet was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and unyielding hope. And as the night deepened, Jake felt a renewed sense of determination settle within him. He would find a way, one that didn't involve McIntyre's twisted games. As he walked out of the hospital, Jake looked back at the building, his heart resolute. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would fight for Michael, no matter what it took. The weight of his choice lingered in Jake's mind, a shadow that loomed over every waking moment. Refusing McIntyre's offer was a decision he believed in, yet he couldn't shake the gnawing fear that he was failing Michael. That fear turned into sleepless nights, which slowly began to erode his focus and determination. One afternoon, Jake received a call from his company, a rare break from his constant presence at the hospital. The voice on the other end was that of his COO, Meredith, who managed the company's day-to-day operations while Jake was away. Jake, I don't mean to overstep, Meredith began, her tone laced with concern, but we're facing some unexpected issues with the Baxter account. It's delicate. Jake rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping into his voice. I thought we had the Baxter contract secure. What's going on, Meredith? A pause hung on the other end of the line. The contract is still in place, but they're reconsidering. They're concerned about, well, your extended absence. It's a major deal, Jake, and they want to know you're committed. Jake felt his frustration bubble up, caught between his obligations to his company and his need to be with Michael. Meredith, I can't be in two places at once. My son. I know. Meredith interjected gently. We all know, and everyone understands why you're away. But Baxter is nervous. They want reassurance from you directly. A heavy silence settled over them, and Jake closed his eyes, feeling the tug of responsibility from all sides. Fine, I'll be there tomorrow. When he hung up, he looked up to find Emma standing in the doorway, having overheard part of the conversation. Concern filled her eyes as she approached him. Jake, you're really thinking about going back to work? Right now? He let out a heavy sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. Emma, I don't have a choice. The company, it's not just a job, it's everything I've built. And if I lose it, I'll lose the means to support Michael. Emma's brow furrowed, a deep sadness in her gaze. But Michael needs you here. He needs to see you beside him. You're all he talks about, Jake. You're his strength right now. Jake looked down, feeling the weight of her words. I'm doing this for him, Emma. If we lose these accounts, I could lose the financial stability he needs. You and I both know the medical bills aren't stopping anytime soon. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, her voice soft yet resolute. I understand, Jake. I really do. But please, don't let the pressure blind you to what Michael needs most. Jake's eyes met hers, and for a moment, he allowed himself to truly feel the depth of his fear and the enormity of his responsibilities. I don't want to be selfish, Emma. I'm just trying to keep everything from falling apart. She nodded, her gaze unwavering. I know. Just remember that being here. It matters more than you think. That night, as Jake sat by Michael's side, He was struck by how much his son had become his anchor. Michael's steady breaths, the soft rise and fall of his chest. It grounded him, gave him a sense of purpose that no boardroom or contract could provide. "Dad." Michael's voice was a whisper, barely audible in the quiet room. Jake leaned closer, taking his son's hand. "Yeah, buddy? Are you going somewhere?" Michael's eyes, wide and searching, held a sadness that nearly broke Jake's heart. Jake hesitated, the truth catching in his throat. "Just for a day or two. I need to check in on some things at work. But I'll be back before you know it." Michael nodded, a flicker of understanding in his gaze. "You don't have to do that for me, you know? I'd rather have you here. Even if things get hard." Jake swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. "I know, son, but sometimes, part of taking care of you means keeping everything stable. It's complicated." Michael offered him a small, weary smile. "I get it, Dad, but just promise me, you won't be gone too long." Jake felt the tightness in his chest loosen slightly, his hand squeezing Michael's gently. "I promise, Michael. And when I come back, we'll pick up right where we left off." The next day, Jake arrived at his office, his body physically present but his mind drifting constantly back to the hospital. The usual hum of the workplace felt foreign, distant, as he moved through meetings and spoke with clients. During a break, Meredith approached him, her face etched with concern. "Jake, if I can be honest, you don't look like yourself. I know Baxter is important, but are you sure you should be here right now?" He sighed, forcing a tight smile. "I'm doing what I have to, Meredith. My son. He's my priority, but I can't ignore everything else." She nodded, her eyes filled with sympathy. "I get it. Just, if you need to go back, we'll hold down the fort. You've done enough here to keep this place running even in your absence." Jake's resolve faltered, the weight of his dual responsibilities bearing down on him. "Thank you, Meredith. I might take you up on that sooner than I thought." The final meeting of the day came and went, and Jake wasted no time heading straight back to the hospital. His heart ached with every step, the hours away feeling like a betrayal to the boy who depended on him. When he finally walked into Michael's room, he found Emma by his side, reading quietly while Michael slept. She looked up, relief crossing her face as she saw him. "Hey," she whispered, setting the book aside. "How did it go?" Jake let out a tired sigh, pulling a chair close to her. "It went all right, but the whole time, I kept thinking about being here. This is where I need to be." Emma nodded, her expression softening. "Then stay, Jake. We'll find a way to make things work. We don't need you stretched so thin. We need you here with us." He reached out, taking her hand. "I just don't want to fail him, Emma. I don't want to lose everything trying to do the right thing." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "You're not failing, Jake. Just by being here, you're showing him what love and dedication look like. And that's worth more than any contract." Jake looked at her, the weight of her words settling deep within him. "Thank you, Emma. I needed to hear that." Together, they sat in the quiet of the hospital room, the beeping machines a constant reminder of the fragility of their situation. Yet in that stillness, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose, his resolve strengthening as he realized that, in this fight for Michael's life, his presence was his greatest gift. Jake spent the following days at the hospital, fully committed to being with Michael. His absence from work sparked an outpouring of support from some and doubt from others. Late one evening, as he sat with Emma outside the hospital room, the warm glow of the hallway lights casting long shadows, his phone buzzed. It was Meredith, his COO, the only person at work who had stood by him through the ordeal. But tonight, her tone was different, brisk, tense. "Jake, we need to talk," she began, not bothering with formalities. "Baxter isn't waiting any longer. They're threatening to pull the account if you don't show immediate involvement." Jake let out a tired sigh, rubbing his temples. "Meredith, I can't be in two places at once." "Michael." "I know about Michael," she cut in, her voice sharp but not unkind. "We're all sympathetic, Jake, but you're not the only one with responsibilities. I've been holding everything together, covering for you. But I can't keep doing this if you're completely absent." Jake's fingers tightened around the phone. "Meredith, he's my son. He needs me right now, and I'm not going to abandon him. And the company? Meredith's tone grew more frustrated. Do you expect it to run on sympathy? This is real life, Jake. We're losing clients. People are starting to question your commitment, and quite frankly, so am I. A rush of anger flared in Jake's chest. He'd given his life to this company, sacrificed countless personal moments to build it from the ground up. I trusted you to handle things while I'm away. I thought I made that clear. Meredith's laugh was humorless. Jake, trust only goes so far. This isn't just about one contract. The board is restless, and they're looking for someone to blame. If you don't come back soon, they might not be waiting for you to decide. Jake felt a chill crawl up his spine. Are you saying they'd replace me? I'm saying they're considering it. They need stability, Jake, and you're not providing that right now. He sat there in silence, the weight of her words settling heavily on him. This was everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed for, now slipping through his fingers. But then his gaze drifted back to Michael's room, where his son lay fighting for his life. There was no competition. No board or contract could compare to his son's well-being. Then let them replace me, he said, his voice low but resolute. If that's what it takes, I'm willing to let it go. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Jake, are you serious? This is your life's work. Don't throw it away out of guilt. This isn't guilt, Meredith. This is love. And if they can't see that, then maybe I don't belong there. Meredith's voice softened slightly, but there was still an edge of frustration. All right, Jake. I'll keep things together as best I can. But don't expect the company to be waiting with open arms when this is all over. With that, she hung up, leaving Jake in a silence thick with the realization of what he might lose. Emma, who had been sitting beside him, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Jake, are you okay? She asked, her voice filled with concern. He shook his head slowly, a small, bitter smile on his lips. I just gave up everything I've worked for. Everything. And yet, I don't feel regret. Not like I thought I would. Emma squeezed his shoulder, her touch warm and grounding. Because you're choosing what matters. That's not something to regret. He looked into her eyes, finding strength in her steady gaze. I used to think the company was everything, that without it, I'd be nothing. But Michael, he's shown me that there's more. That there's a life outside of work. Emma smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. He's given us both a reason to be here, Jake, to be present. And right now, that's the greatest gift we can give him. A soft knock interrupted their conversation, and they turned to see Michael's nurse standing in the doorway. Mr. Riley, Ms. Jackson, she said gently, Michael is asking for you. They exchanged a quick glance, emotions raw as they stood, and followed the nurse into Michael's room. Michael was awake, his face pale but his eyes bright with anticipation. Hey, Dad. Hey, Mom, he greeted, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake leaned down, taking his son's hand. Hey, champ, how are you feeling? Michael shrugged, managing a small smile. Better now that you're both here. I was worried. I heard you talking outside. Jake's heart clenched, realizing Michael had overheard more than they intended. It's okay, buddy. Everything's okay. We're right here. Michael looked at him, his gaze unwavering. Are you really going to leave your job? For me. Jake glanced at Emma, who gave him a supportive nod, then turned back to Michael. Yes, Michael, I am. Because you're more important than any job. You're my son. And nothing else matters. A tear slipped down Michael's cheek, and he squeezed Jake's hand tightly. Thank you, Dad. I don't want you to lose everything because of me, but I'm really glad you're here. Jake felt his own eyes sting with tears as he brushed a hand over Michael's hair. I'd give up everything 1,000 times over just to be with you. Don't ever doubt that. Michael nodded, his face relaxing, a look of peace settling over him. Emma reached for Michael's other hand, and they sat together, a quiet understanding passing between them. In that moment, Jake knew he had made the right choice. And as they sat by Michael's side, the sacrifices of the outside world faded into insignificance. This was his world now, a world built on love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his son. The following morning, as sunlight poured through the hospital room's window, casting a warm glow over Michael's sleeping form, Jake and Emma shared a quiet moment, sipping coffee and savoring the rare peace. The past days had been filled with relentless emotional upheaval, but today, something felt different, lighter, almost as if a weight had momentarily lifted. Their thoughts were interrupted by the familiar figure of Dr. Thompson entering the room, a noticeable spark of energy in his stride. Jake immediately straightened, catching the subtle shift in the doctor's demeanor. "Good morning," Dr. Thompson greeted them, his voice unusually upbeat. "I have some unexpected news." Emma leaned forward, her eyes widening with a mixture of hope and caution. "What kind of news, Doctor?" Dr. Thompson took a seat across from them, his gaze steady and encouraging. "We've just received information about a new possible match for Michael. It's early, but the initial indicators are very promising." Jake's heart skipped a beat, and he reached for Emma's hand, feeling a swell of cautious hope. "Match? So, you mean there's a real chance this time?" The doctor nodded, his expression warm yet measured. "Yes, there's a possibility. The potential donor was recently identified, and if all goes well with the final compatibility tests, we could move forward with the procedure very soon." Emma's face lit up with a radiant, tearful smile. She turned to Jake, her eyes filled with renewed hope. "Jake, did you hear that? This could really be it." Jake squeezed her hand tightly, his voice barely a whisper. "I heard, Emma. It's everything we've been praying for." At that moment, Michael stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Seeing his parents' faces glowing with excitement, he looked between them, a small smile forming as he noticed their expressions. "What's going on?" he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. Jake leaned over, gently brushing Michael's hair back. "Buddy, Dr. Thompson just told us they found a possible match. There's a chance you might get the transplant soon." Michael's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. Are you serious?" Dr. Thompson gave him a reassuring nod. "Yes, Michael, we're serious. It's not a guarantee yet, but things are looking very good." For the first time in weeks, Michael's face broke into a broad, genuine smile. That's amazing. I wasn't sure if I should get my hopes up again." Emma took his hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "Sweetheart, it's okay to believe in this. You've been so strong. We're almost there." Michael's smile softened, his eyes shining with a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. I'm ready to fight a little longer." Dr. Thompson cleared his throat gently, bringing their attention back to him. "There's a bit more we'll need to discuss as we get the final test results back. But for now, let's focus on the positives. If everything checks out, we'll be preparing for the procedure within a few days." A quiet joy filled the room, a fragile yet beautiful sense of relief that wrapped around them. They spent the next hour talking about what they would do once Michael was better, planning small trips, imagining shared moments outside the confines of hospital walls. It was a glimpse of normalcy, a taste of the life they had all yearned for. But as the hours slipped by and Jake went to get fresh air in the hospital garden, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it set him on edge. Answering, he found himself greeted by a voice he knew all too well. "Jake," came McIntyre's voice, smooth and detached, as though the events of the past weeks had never happened. Jake's jaw clenched, his entire body tensing. "What do you want, McIntyre?" There was a slight chuckle on the other end. Now, Jake. No need for hostility. I just wanted to congratulate you. I heard about the potential match." Jake's blood ran cold, and he glanced around, trying to keep his voice low. How do you know about that?" McIntyre's tone remained smug, unfazed. "I have my ways. You don't work in my circles without keeping an eye on things that interest you." Jake gritted his teeth, trying to keep his temper in check. "If you're calling to rub it in, save your breath. We don't need your help anymore." McIntyre laughed softly, the sound chilling. "Oh, Jake, this isn't about help. This is about reality. I just thought I'd remind you of one small detail. Matches don't always pan out. People change their minds. Medical situations shift. Donors become unavailable. Are you really prepared for that possibility? Jake's pulse raced, McIntyre's words igniting a fresh wave of anxiety. Are you saying you'd interfere? McIntyre's voice dropped, his tone darkening. I'm saying, Jake, that hope is a dangerous thing. You're so close to a solution, but don't let your optimism cloud reality. If things don't go as planned, well, you know where to find me. Jake's grip on his phone tightened. His jaw clenched as he fought to keep his voice steady. You stay away from my family, McIntyre. I don't care what you think you can do. We don't need you. McIntyre's voice held a cold amusement. For your sake, Jake, I hope you're right. Just remember, desperation has a way of bringing people back to me. I'll be waiting. The line went dead, leaving Jake standing in the quiet of the hospital garden, a renewed sense of dread settling over him. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of the hope Dr. Thompson had given them that morning, trying to shake off the unsettling words McIntyre had planted. When he returned to Michael's room, Emma noticed the tension in his face. Jake, is everything all right? He forced a smile, hoping to mask his anxiety. Yeah, everything's fine. Just a lot to take in, you know? Michael looked at him, a flicker of worry in his eyes. Dad, are you sure? You look different. Jake moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. I'm fine, buddy. Really. Today is a good day, and that's what matters. But even as he said the words, Jake couldn't shake the lingering fear that McIntyre had stirred within him. He pushed it down, choosing instead to focus on the joy they'd shared earlier. This was their chance. He wouldn't let McIntyre's shadow darken their hope. As the sun began to set, casting warm hues across the hospital room, Jake and Emma sat beside Michael, determined to savor every moment of this fragile peace. And in their hearts, they clung to the hope that soon they would be taking Michael home, free from the shadows that had haunted them for so long. The days after the news of the potential match were a roller coaster of hope and tension. Jake did his best to stay optimistic for Michael's sake, but McIntyre's veiled threats lingered in the back of his mind, casting a shadow over every hopeful moment. Determined not to let fear ruin what could be precious time with his son, he decided to focus on deepening the bond they were just beginning to rebuild. One evening, after Emma had left to get some rest, Jake sat beside Michael's bed, flipping through a book Michael had been reading. They had fallen into a comfortable silence, but Jake could sense something on Michael's mind. Dad, Michael's voice broke the quiet, soft and hesitant. Jake looked up, setting the book down. Yeah, buddy? What's on your mind? Michael hesitated, picking at a loose thread on his blanket. I was wondering, when I get better, what's the first thing you'd want to do together? The question took Jake by surprise, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest. He leaned back, his mind flooding with images of everything he wanted to experience with Michael. That's a good question, Jake said, smiling. There's so much I'd love to do with you. Maybe a road trip? Just you and me, taking in the sights, exploring new places. Michael's eyes lit up, a spark of excitement glimmering. A road trip sounds awesome. I'd love that. I've never really traveled anywhere far. Just local places, you know? Jake nodded, his heart aching as he realized how much Michael had missed. Then we'll make it the best trip you've ever had. We'll go wherever you want. No limits. Michael laughed softly, his eyes full of wonder. Anywhere, huh? Even the beach? Especially the beach, Jake replied with a grin. Imagine walking on the sand, feeling the waves on your feet. We'll build the biggest sandcastle anyone's ever seen. Michael's smile faded slightly, a glint of uncertainty crossing his face. Do you really think I'll be strong enough to do all that? Jake's expression softened, and he leaned forward, placing a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Michael. And whatever happens, we'll make it work. We'll take it one step at a time, but I promise you we'll get there. Michael looked away, his fingers tracing patterns on the blanket. I want to believe that, Dad. It's just, sometimes I get scared. I'm scared that this will all be a dream, and I'll wake up, still here. Jake felt a lump in his throat, and he swallowed hard, fighting to keep his emotions in check. I get scared too, Michael. More than I'd like to admit. But you're not alone. We're in this together, and I won't let you down." Michael's eyes met his, the vulnerability raw and heartbreaking. "Thank you, Dad. I don't want to give up, not when I have you and Mom. But sometimes, it's hard to keep hoping." Jake leaned closer, his hands squeezing Michael's gently. "That's okay. It's okay to feel scared. But remember, every time you feel that way, I'm right here. You don't have to face it alone." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their fears settling around them. But in that silence, there was also an unspoken understanding. A promise that no matter how dark the road became, they would walk it together. As the days passed, Jake continued to pour himself into every moment with Michael. He told stories of his own childhood, shared memories he had never thought to revisit, and listened intently as Michael opened up about his own dreams and fears. The walls of the hospital room became less of a cage and more of a sanctuary where they found solace in each other's presence. One evening, Emma brought in an old family photo album, and together, they pored over the faded images of Jake's youth. Michael pointed to a photo of Jake as a teenager, his hair a mess and a grin on his face as he held a fishing rod. "Is that you, Dad?" Michael asked, his voice filled with surprise. Jake chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "Yeah, that was me. Your grandpa used to take me fishing. I wasn't any good, but I loved it." Michael laughed, his eyes alight with fascination. "You look so different. I didn't know you used to be well young." Emma joined in, laughing softly. "Oh, he was quite the rebel in his day. You should hear some of the stories from his college days." Jake gave her a playful glare. "All right, let's not embarrass me too much now." Michael grinned, his face beaming with curiosity. "Come on, Mom. I want to hear everything. Don't hold back." As they laughed and shared stories, Jake felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. This was what he had been missing. These small, intimate moments that made life rich and full. For the first time in a long while, he felt like more than a businessman, more than a worried parent. He felt like a father, connected to his son in a way he never thought possible. After the laughter died down, Michael looked up, his gaze filled with something deeper. "I can't wait to make our own memories, Dad. Ones we can look back on like this." Jake reached over, brushing a hand over Michael's hair. "We will, Michael. And they'll be the best memories. Just you wait." Later that night, as Jake sat alone by Michael's bedside, watching him sleep, he felt a sense of peace. The doubts, the fears, they hadn't disappeared. But in their place was a quiet strength, a belief that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the days passed, the final test results for the transplant came back with good news. The match was indeed compatible. The air in the hospital room was charged with a mixture of relief, joy, and a lingering undercurrent of tension. Jake, Emma, and Michael had clung to this hope for so long that when it finally arrived, it felt almost surreal. Dr. Thompson entered the room with a calm but encouraging expression, holding the official report in his hands. "The results are in," he announced, and the room fell silent, all eyes on him. "The match is compatible, and we're preparing for surgery." Jake felt his heart skip a beat, a flood of emotions surging through him. He reached for Emma's hand, his grip tight as if grounding himself in the reality of the moment. Michael's face lit up with a tentative smile, a glimmer of excitement finally breaking through the weariness in his eyes. "Does this mean I'm really getting a new liver?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper, his disbelief apparent. Dr. Thompson nodded, his own smile softening with understanding. "Yes, Michael, we're moving forward. The surgery is complex, but we have a strong team, and your chances look very good." Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her eyes filling with tears as she turned to Michael. "Oh, sweetheart, this is it. You're going to be okay." Michael's smile widened, but as the initial excitement settled, a new expression appeared on his face, a quiet, solemn understanding of the gravity of what lay ahead. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady but laced with a hint of fear. Jake knelt by his son's side, taking both of Michael's hands in his own. "You're the bravest kid I know, Michael. We're so proud of you, and we're with you every step of the way. Just hold on a little longer, okay?" Michael nodded, his gaze steady on his father. "I will, Dad. I promise." Dr. Thompson gave them a moment before clearing his throat gently. We'll begin the pre-surgery preparations shortly. You'll have a little time together before we take Michael to the operating room. As Dr. Thompson left, the room grew quiet, the weight of the upcoming procedure settling over them. Emma moved closer to Michael, brushing a hand gently through his hair. You're going to be just fine. And once this is all over, we'll have that road trip, just like we talked about. Michael smiled up at her, though his eyes held a flicker of uncertainty. I know, Mom. It's just, I'm a little scared. Jake placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. It's okay to be scared. We're scared too. But that's why we're here, to remind you that you're not facing this alone. Michael's voice was barely audible as he looked between them. Will you? Will you both be there when I wake up? Emma's hand found Michael's, her fingers entwining with his. Of course, sweetheart. We'll be right here, waiting for you. We're not going anywhere. Michael swallowed, his gaze softening. Thank you for everything. I wouldn't have gotten through this without you. Tears welled in Jake's eyes as he leaned closer, his voice thick with emotion. It's us who are grateful, Michael. You've shown us what true strength looks like. You've brought us together in ways we didn't even know were possible. Michael gave him a small, shy smile. I just wanted to make you both proud. Emma's tears fell freely as she cupped Michael's face, her thumb gently brushing his cheek. Oh, sweetheart, we couldn't be prouder of you. You're our hero. As they held each other, the raw emotions in the room overflowed. There was fear, yes, but also an overwhelming sense of love and unity, a deep bond that had been forged through the shared journey they had endured. A few minutes later, the nurse arrived to begin the preparations, gently reminding them of the time. Jake and Emma exchanged a glance, their silent communication conveying both their shared fears and their unyielding support for each other and for Michael. Before Michael was taken to the operating room, Jake leaned down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. We'll see you soon, buddy. And when you wake up, we're going to have so many new memories to make. Michael squeezed his father's hand one last time, his voice soft but resolute. I love you, Dad. Jake's voice cracked as he replied, I love you too, Michael. More than anything in this world. Emma held Michael's other hand, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. You're going to be just fine, sweetheart. We're with you always. With a final squeeze of their hands, Michael was wheeled away, his gaze lingering on his parents until he disappeared around the corner. The emptiness in the room was immediate, a sudden, overwhelming void that Jake and Emma felt deeply. They stood together in silence for a moment, each of them processing the intensity of what they just experienced. Jake pulled Emma close, wrapping his arms around her as they both struggled to hold back the wave of emotions that threatened to consume them. He's going to be okay, Jake murmured, more to reassure himself than anything. He's strong, Emma. Stronger than I ever imagined. Emma nodded against his chest, her arms wrapped tightly around him. Yes, he is. And he's lucky to have a father who never gave up on him. You did everything you could, Jake. Everything. Jake swallowed hard, his voice thick with gratitude and fear. I just want him to have the chance to live, Emma. To have a life filled with moments like these. Emma pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. He will, Jake. And we'll be there to see it. They held each other close, letting the silence of the empty room envelop them, a shared strength and love binding them together as they waited for Michael to come back to them. The hours passed slowly, every minute stretching painfully as Jake and Emma waited for news. They sat side by side in the quiet waiting room, hands tightly clasped, their shared anxiety a silent but powerful connection between them. Jake felt every second ticking away, his heart pounding with an unease he couldn't shake. Finally, as dawn's soft light began to filter through the hospital's windows, Dr. Thompson appeared, his face drawn and eyes weary. Jake and Emma stood immediately, reading the tension in his posture. Dr. Thompson? Jake's voice was tight, his stomach twisting with dread. Dr. Thompson took a deep breath, his gaze heavy. I need to speak with both of you. Let's sit down. They exchanged a quick glance, fear flickering in Emma's eyes as they followed the doctor to a private room. Once inside, Dr. Thompson closed the door behind them, his face grave as he looked at them. "The procedure. It didn't go as we had planned," he began, his voice low and measured. "There were complications during the transplant," Emma gasped, covering her mouth, while Jake felt a chill settle over him. "Complications?" he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of complications?" Dr. Thompson's expression softened, but the tension in his eyes was unmistakable. "The liver transplant began as expected, but as we proceeded, Michael's body showed signs of significant distress. His vitals dropped unexpectedly, and he went into cardiac arrest. We were able to stabilize him, but the liver, it hasn't taken as we'd hoped." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of his chair, feeling the weight of despair sinking into his bones. Are you saying?" Dr. Thompson nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, there's a high chance of rejection. We're doing everything we can, but it's critical." Emma's shoulders shook as silent tears slipped down her cheeks. No, this can't be happening. We were so close. He was so close." Jake clenched his jaw, his fists trembling with the effort to hold himself together. What can we do now? Is there any other option?" Dr. Thompson met his gaze, a glimmer of sympathy in his eyes. "We'll monitor him closely, and we've started medication to try and counter the rejection, but the situation is incredibly delicate. The next 24 hours will be critical." Jake nodded, swallowing the knot of emotion in his throat. He felt a surge of helplessness that he hadn't felt in years, an aching powerlessness that left him hollow. He looked at Emma, her face pale and devastated, and he reached out, pulling her into his arms. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Thompson said softly. "I know how hard this is. We're not giving up, but I wanted you both to be prepared." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. We just wanted him to have a chance. Just one chance." Dr. Thompson gave a solemn nod, his gaze filled with empathy. "We're going to do everything in our power. Please hold on to that." As Dr. Thompson left, the silence in the room was suffocating. Jake held Emma, her sobs muffled against his chest as he stroked her hair, his own tears slipping silently down his face. He felt as though his world was crumbling, the hope they had fought so hard for slipping through his fingers. After a while, they made their way back to Michael's room, where he lay pale and motionless, hooked up to countless machines that monitored his every heartbeat, every breath. Jake stood beside him, feeling a wave of sorrow as he looked at his son's peaceful but fragile form. Emma sat by Michael's bedside, taking his hand in hers, her voice shaking. "Michael, sweetheart, you're so strong. I know you can get through this. We believe in you." Jake moved closer, his hand gently brushing over Michael's hair. "We're here, buddy. We're not going anywhere." They sat in silence, each breath filled with a mixture of hope and despair, waiting for any sign, any flicker of improvement. Jake found himself whispering silent prayers, promises he would keep if only Michael would wake up, if only he could see his son smile again. Hours passed, and the day wore on, each second stretching painfully. Nurses came and went, checking Michael's vitals, adjusting medications, their expressions carefully neutral. Jake watched them with a growing desperation, his heart sinking each time they left without any reassuring news. As night fell, Emma drifted into a restless sleep by Michael's side, her hands still holding his. Jake stepped out of the room, needing a moment to breathe, to gather the strength he felt slipping away. He found himself in the empty hospital corridor, the lights dim, the silence almost oppressive. He leaned against the wall, pressing his palms to his face, fighting back the despair that threatened to overwhelm him. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Jake looked down, and his heart sank further when he saw the name on the screen. McIntyre. Jake's grip tightened on the phone, a mix of anger and exhaustion flooding through him. Reluctantly, he answered, his voice low and strained. "What do you want, McIntyre?" McIntyre's voice was calm, almost mocking. "I heard about the complications. I just wanted to check in, see how you're holding up." Jake's jaw clenched, his body tense with rage. "You have no right to be calling me right now." "Oh, Jake." McIntyre's voice was smooth, unfazed by the anger. "I only want to remind you that there are other paths. The offer still stands. You don't have to watch him suffer. Jake closed his eyes, the weight of McIntyre's words pressing down on him. Every fiber of his being wanted to refuse, to tell him to stay away. But the image of Michael lying motionless on the hospital bed, the possibility of losing him, it gnawed at him, wearing down his resolve. Think about it, Jake, McIntyre continued, his voice soft, persuasive. There's still time. You could give him a second chance. If you're willing to step beyond those limits you hold so dearly. Jake's heart pounded, a storm of emotions swirling within him. I told you before, McIntyre. I'm not that desperate. Not yet. McIntyre's tone turned cold, almost amused. Desperation has a way of finding you, Jake. When you're ready, you know where to find me. The line went dead, leaving Jake standing alone in the dim corridor, the quiet of the hospital pressing down on him like a physical weight. He leaned back against the wall, taking deep, shuddering breaths as he fought to regain control, to hold onto the faith that was slipping away with every hour. When he returned to Michael's room, he found Emma awake, her eyes red-rimmed but filled with a fierce determination. She looked at him, and in that shared gaze, they found a renewed sense of purpose, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. They sat by Michael's side, holding his hands, whispering words of love and encouragement, clinging to the fragile hope that, somehow, he would pull through. And as the night wore on, they stayed vigilant, bound by the unbreakable love they shared for their son, refusing to give up, even as the world around them seemed to fall apart. As the night wore on, Jake found himself slipping into an exhausted, tense silence, his mind racing with memories, doubts, and regrets. He sat by Michael's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, each breath a fragile tether holding him to hope. Emma sat beside him, her hand resting on Michael's, her eyes red and weary but filled with determination. Around dawn, Jake's resolve began to waver. The weight of McIntyre's offer hung heavy in his mind, its dark promise lurking at the edge of his consciousness. He glanced at Emma, her face etched with exhaustion and worry, and he knew he couldn't keep his fears hidden any longer. Emma, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Emma looked up, surprised by the raw emotion in his voice. Jake, what are you saying? He took a shaky breath, his hands clenched tightly. I keep thinking about McIntyre's offer. He's waiting for me to say yes. And part of me is so tempted. Emma's face paled, her eyes widening with alarm. Jake? No, you can't seriously be considering that. You know what kind of man he is. He's manipulative and dangerous. Jake ran a hand over his face, feeling the exhaustion seep into his bones. I know, Emma, I know. But what if he's right? What if this is the only way? Michael's slipping away, and every second feels like it's pushing him further from us. Emma reached for his hand, her grip firm. Jake, I'm terrified too. I feel like my heart is breaking every minute we're here. But we can't let McIntyre take advantage of that. We can't make this decision out of fear. Jake closed his eyes, her words sinking in, though the weight of doubt remained. But what if it's our only option? I don't know how much more I can take, Emma. I don't want to lose him. Emma's gaze softened, and she moved closer, her hand finding his cheek, forcing him to meet her eyes. Jake, listen to me. I love Michael more than anything, and I know you do too. But we have to trust that he's strong enough. We can't let McIntyre manipulate us when we're at our most vulnerable. Jake swallowed hard, the warmth of her hand on his face grounding him. I don't want to fail him. Emma's voice softened, her eyes filled with an unwavering strength. Jake, you haven't failed him. You've been here every step of the way. You fought for him. And that means more than any desperate deal with someone like McIntyre. Her words settled over him, and he felt a surge of clarity, the fog of fear lifting slightly. He reached up, taking her hand in his, the silent support in her touch rekindling his resolve. They sat in silence, the early morning light filtering through the window, casting a soft glow over the room. It was then that Michael stirred, his eyelids fluttering slightly as he let out a faint, shaky breath. Jake and Emma immediately leaned forward, their hands reaching for his. "Michael," Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Michael's eyes opened slowly, his gaze unfocused before settling on them. He managed a weak smile, his voice barely a whisper. "Hey, I thought I heard you too." Emma's face broke into a tearful smile, her hand brushing gently over his hair. "We're right here, sweetheart. We're not going anywhere." Michael's gaze shifted to Jake, a look of quiet understanding in his eyes. "Dad, I know you're worried, but I'm okay. I'm still here." Jake's throat tightened, and he felt the weight of his fears melt away in that moment. He took Michael's hand, his grip gentle but full of purpose. "I was so scared, buddy, but you're right. You're still here, and we're going to keep fighting." Michael offered a small nod, his expression calm. "I'm fighting too, Dad. For you and Mom." Jake felt a wave of pride, and he leaned forward, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "We're in this together, Michael. No shortcuts, no easy ways out. Just us, fighting side by side." Emma squeezed Michael's hand, her voice full of love. "You've been so strong, Michael, and no matter what happens, we're so proud of you." Michael's eyes closed for a moment, his breathing slow and steady. When he opened them again, he looked at Jake, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for believing in me." Jake nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "We'll never stop believing in you." Not for a second. As the morning wore on, they sat with Michael, a renewed sense of purpose binding them together. Jake's doubts faded, replaced by the steady, unwavering knowledge that they were on this path together. They had chosen hope, chosen love, and in that choice, they found a strength they hadn't known they possessed. For the first time in days, Jake felt a sense of peace, a belief that no matter what came next, they would face it as a family, unbreakable and bound by the love they shared. With Michael showing slight improvements each day, a quiet hope began to settle over Jake and Emma. They knew the road ahead was still uncertain, but the strength they'd rediscovered in themselves and in each other kept them going. However, the specter of McIntyre's threats lingered, a reminder that, at any moment, he could try to disrupt the peace they were fighting so hard to maintain. One afternoon, Jake decided he couldn't let McIntyre's shadow loom over their lives any longer. He knew that to truly put this behind them, he had to confront McIntyre directly, once and for all. He had to make it clear that his family was not to be manipulated or controlled. He didn't tell Emma. He didn't want her to worry, but he felt an intense need to protect his family from any further interference. Jake found himself standing outside the dimly lit office building where McIntyre conducted his business. The atmosphere felt oppressive, and the air was thick with tension as he walked in, his footsteps echoing down the quiet, nearly empty hallway. When he entered the office, McIntyre was waiting, his gaze sharp and expectant. "Jake Riley," McIntyre greeted, his voice smooth and dripping with calculated calm. "I had a feeling I'd be seeing you sooner or later. Did you finally come to your senses?" Jake squared his shoulders, forcing himself to maintain a steady gaze. "This isn't about your offer, McIntyre. I came to make something clear. You stay away from my family. We don't need you, and we don't want anything from you." McIntyre smirked, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Oh, Jake, you act as if you're in control, but we both know that's an illusion, don't we? You came here because you realized just how vulnerable you really are." Jake felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he kept his tone calm. "Vulnerable or not, I'm not letting you use my son's situation to play your twisted games. You may think you have control, but you've got nothing. Michael is strong, and we're going to get through this without your interference." McIntyre's eyes gleamed with a cold amusement, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You're making a mistake, Jake, one that could cost you more than you realize. I don't offer my assistance lightly. Once you turn me down, there's no coming back." Jake clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain steady. "Good, because I don't want to come back. My family has been through enough, and I won't let you poison what we're trying to build. We've found strength without you, and that's something you'll never understand." McIntyre's smirk faded, replaced by a dark intensity. He leaned forward, his tone laced with menace. Strength? Don't fool yourself, Jake. The only reason you're here is because you're desperate. When you're backed into a corner, when you're at your breaking point, you'll remember this moment. And you'll wish you'd made a different choice. Jake felt the weight of McIntyre's words, but his resolve only solidified. No, I won't. Because I know that nothing you offer is worth losing myself or my family's peace. We don't need you, and we never will. McIntyre's face twisted into a sneer, his composure slipping. Walk out of here, and you'll be on your own. Don't expect any mercy from the world, Jake. You're a fool if you think love alone can save you. Jake straightened, a surge of pride and conviction filling him. Maybe I am a fool, but I'd rather be a fool with my family, standing by their side, than a man who's lost everything just to get ahead. Goodbye, McIntyre. This is the last time we'll speak. Without waiting for a response, Jake turned and left the office, his heart pounding but his mind clear. As he stepped out into the fresh air, he felt a sense of release, as though a weight he hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying had been lifted. He had faced his fear, and he had chosen his family over the tempting promises of power and control. When he returned to the hospital, he found Emma sitting by Michael's bed, reading to him softly. She looked up as he entered, a gentle smile on her face, her eyes full of warmth and relief. "Where were you?" she asked, closing the book as he approached. Jake took a deep breath, a peaceful smile spreading across his face. "I had to take care of something that's been hanging over us for too long." Emma raised an eyebrow, curiosity mixed with concern. "Did it have anything to do with McIntyre?" Jake nodded, taking her hand, his voice steady and calm. "Yes, I want to see him. I wanted to make sure he understood that we're not his to manipulate. I told him that we don't need him, and that we never will." Emma's expression softened, pride filling her eyes as she squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Jake. I know that wasn't easy, but it means the world to me, and to Michael." Michael stirred slightly, his voice faint but filled with a quiet strength. "Does that mean he's gone? He won't bother us anymore?" Jake leaned over, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "That's right, buddy. He's gone. We don't need anything he offered, because we have everything we need right here." Michael smiled, a look of relief passing over his face. "Thank you, Dad. I don't want anything to come between us. We're strong enough." Together, Jake felt a swell of pride, his heart full of love and gratitude. He looked between Emma and Michael, knowing that the strength he had found wasn't just his own. It was theirs. They had fought for each other, and they would continue to fight together, no matter what came next. As they sat together, a quiet peace settled over them. They were still in the midst of a long and uncertain journey, but for the first time, Jake felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were a family bound by love, resilience, and an unwavering belief in each other. And in that, they had found a strength that no threat could ever break. In the days following Jake's confrontation with McIntyre, Michael's health gradually stabilized, and the medical team monitored him closely, watching for signs of improvement. The atmosphere in the hospital room was a mix of tension and hope, each passing moment a reminder of how precious their time together was. One afternoon, as Jake sat by Michael's side, a nurse entered with a concerned look. She gestured for Jake to step outside the room, casting a cautious glance at Emma. Jake excused himself, leaving Emma with Michael as he followed the nurse down the hall. In the hallway, Dr. Thompson was waiting, his face unusually serious. He gestured for Jake to sit beside him, his gaze filled with a somber intensity that sent a chill down Jake's spine. "Dr. Thompson, what's going on?" Jake asked, his voice tense with worry. The doctor took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Jake, I need to be honest with you. Michael's condition has been stable, but he's not out of danger yet. His body is responding better than we initially expected, but the recovery process is far from guaranteed." Jake's heart sank, his throat tightening. "What are you saying? That he might still?" Dr. Thompson met his gaze, his expression gentle but firm. "I'm saying we're cautiously optimistic, but we can't let our guard down. Michael has shown incredible resilience, but his recovery will be a long journey. Jake nodded, his mind racing as he processed the news. Thank you, doctor. We'll keep fighting. We'll be here for him every step of the way. Dr. Thompson gave a supportive nod, then left Jake alone in the hallway. The weight of the news settled over him, and he took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steel himself before returning to Michael and Emma. When he walked back into the room, Emma looked up, her face etched with worry. Jake? What did Dr. Thompson say? Jake gave her a small, reassuring smile, moving to sit beside her. He said Michael's stable, but we're not out of the woods yet. It's a long road, but we'll get through it. Emma's eyes softened, and she took his hand, her grip warm and steady. We've made it this far. We can handle whatever comes next. As they sat together, Michael stirred, his eyes opening slowly as he looked between them. He managed a small smile, his voice soft. Hey, you guys, why do you look so serious? Jake chuckled, leaning in close. Just worried about you, buddy, but you're doing great. We're so proud of you. Michael's gaze shifted to Emma, his smile growing. I couldn't have done it without you too. You've been here through everything. I don't know how to thank you. Emma leaned in, brushing a hand gently over his hair. You don't need to thank us, sweetheart. Just keep fighting. That's all we need from you. A knock at the door interrupted the tender moment, and a hospital administrator entered, holding a clipboard. Mr. Riley, Ms. Jackson, I need a few minutes to discuss some paperwork regarding Michael's treatment. Could you step outside with me? Jake felt a wave of frustration. The last thing he wanted was to be bogged down in more paperwork, but he nodded, giving Michael's hand a gentle squeeze before following the administrator into the hallway with Emma. The administrator began explaining the paperwork, but Jake's mind wandered, his focus drifting back to Michael. They had come so far, and though he trusted the doctors, the lingering fear of the unknown gnawed at him. Just then, he heard the faintest footsteps echoing down the corridor. When he looked up, his breath caught. McIntyre was standing at the far end of the hallway, watching him with a smug, knowing expression. Jake's hands clenched into fists, anger flaring as he took a step toward him. What are you doing here, McIntyre? I told you to stay away. McIntyre raised his hands in mock innocence, a smirk playing on his lips. I'm just here to see how things are going. It seems like you've been through quite the ordeal. Jake gritted his teeth, his voice barely controlled. You don't belong here. Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out. McIntyre's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing as he took a step closer. Careful, Jake. You know I don't take threats lightly. Besides, I've come with one last offer, one that could make all of this go away. Emma moved to stand beside Jake, her face pale but resolute. We don't want anything from you. Not now, not ever. McIntyre's gaze shifted to her, his expression cold and calculating. Think carefully. A second chance like this doesn't come often. You might not like me, but deep down, you know that I can make things happen. You've seen what I'm capable of. Jake stepped in front of Emma, his voice filled with defiance. We've had enough of your games. We don't need your help. Michael has shown more strength and courage than you could ever understand. We'll get through this without you. McIntyre's smirk faded, his gaze hardening. So, this is your final answer? Jake nodded, unwavering. Yes, we're done. Whatever power you think you have over us, it's over. For a moment, McIntyre's face contorted with anger, but he quickly masked it, offering a cold, forced smile. Very well. Remember this moment, Jake. You chose this path. Don't come crying to me when things don't work out as you hoped. With a final sneer, McIntyre turned and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Jake and Emma standing together, the tension in the air slowly dissipating. Jake exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and defiance. Emma took his hand, her voice soft but firm. You did the right thing, Jake. We've made it this far together, and we'll keep going. He can't touch us. Jake nodded, a quiet sense of triumph filling him. You're right. He has no power over us anymore. We're stronger than anything he could throw at us. They returned to Michael's room, the strength of their decision radiating between them. Michael, sensing the shift in their demeanor, looked up with a hopeful smile. "Did something good happen?" Jake smiled, moving to sit by his side. "Yes, buddy. Something very good happened. We're free from anything that could pull us apart. Now, it's just us, together, fighting for each other." Michael's face lit up with a contented smile, his eyes shining with relief. "That's all I wanted. Just us as a family." Jake's heart swelled with pride, and he felt an unbreakable bond between them. No longer weighed down by fear, they were ready to face whatever came next, united and unafraid. As the days passed, Michael's condition steadily improved, and the doctors grew increasingly optimistic about his recovery. Jake and Emma felt an overwhelming sense of relief, their worries gradually giving way to renewed hope. Every day, Michael grew stronger, his laughter filling the room as he shared dreams for the future, each plan a reminder of how far they had come. One afternoon, as the sun cast warm rays through the hospital window, Dr. Thompson entered with a bright smile, carrying a chart in his hands. Jake and Emma looked up expectantly, their hearts pounding with anticipation. "I have good news," Dr. Thompson began, his voice warm with reassurance. "Michael's body has responded remarkably well to the transplant. Barring any unexpected setbacks, he'll be ready to go home soon." Emma let out a soft gasp, her hand flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "Oh, thank goodness. Thank you, doctor." Jake reached for Michael's hand, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "You did it, buddy. You fought through every challenge and now, you're going home." Michael's eyes shone with joy, a broad smile spreading across his face. "I can't believe it. We're really going home?" Jake nodded, his own eyes misty as he took a deep breath. "Yes, Michael. Home, together where you belong." Just as they were savoring the relief and excitement of the moment, a commotion erupted outside in the hallway. Raised voices echoed down the corridor, one of which was chillingly familiar. "Jake Riley, get out here now." McIntyre's voice rang out, loud and insistent, filled with a desperation Jake hadn't heard before. Emma's face tensed, her eyes wide with fear. "Oh no, why is he here?" Jake's expression hardened, and he rose from his seat, his resolve unwavering. "Stay with Michael. I'll handle this." He stepped into the hallway, where he found McIntyre flanked by two security guards, their arms crossed as they blocked his path. McIntyre's face was flushed, his eyes wild, the composed mask he usually wore shattered. "What do you want, McIntyre?" Jake's voice was firm, his gaze cold. McIntyre scoffed, his expression twisted with anger and frustration. "You think you can just walk away? That you can reject everything I offered without consequence?" Jake crossed his arms, unfazed by the man's outburst. "Yes, McIntyre, that's exactly what I think. My family has no place for your manipulations or your twisted idea of help." McIntyre's face contorted with rage, his voice growing louder. "You're a fool, Jake. A fool for throwing away everything you could have had. I could have given you power, influence, and you threw it all away for what? Sentiment?" Jake shook his head, a sense of calm settling over him. "I chose what mattered, and what matters is my family, not your empty promises." Just then, Dr. Thompson approached, frowning as he assessed the situation. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone sharp. McIntyre laughed bitterly, turning to the doctor. "The problem, doctor, is that this man is too blind to see the opportunities right in front of him. He's too weak to accept the help he needs." Dr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "I think Mr. Riley has made his choice clear. Now, if you don't have any business here, I suggest you leave before we call the authorities." McIntyre's face twisted with fury, and he cast one last venomous look at Jake. "You'll regret this. When everything falls apart, you'll realize you made the biggest mistake of your life." Jake held his gaze, unflinching. "I've never been more certain of a decision. Now leave, McIntyre. You have no power here." With a final huff, McIntyre turned and stormed down the hall, his footsteps echoing as he disappeared from sight. The tension in the air lifted, and Jake let out a deep breath, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. Dr. Thompson placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, Mr. Riley. Some people don't understand that true strength comes from love and loyalty, not power." Jake nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you, Doctor. It's taken me a while to learn that, but I know now that my family is worth more than anything McIntyre could ever offer." He returned to Michael's room, where Emma and Michael were waiting, their faces filled with a mixture of worry and curiosity. Michael looked up, his expression uncertain. "Dad, is everything okay?" Jake moved to sit beside him, reaching out to hold both Emma and Michael's hands. "Yes, buddy, everything's more than okay. McIntyre is gone, and he won't be bothering us again." Michael's face softened, a sense of peace settling over him. "That's all I needed to hear." Emma leaned her head on Jake's shoulder, her eyes filled with love and relief. "We're finally free, Jake. We can just be a family." As they sat together, basking in the warmth of the moment, Jake felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The trials they had faced had brought them closer, bound by a love that had proven unbreakable. They had found strength not in power, but in each other, and that was the greatest victory he could ever hope for. The following week, after days of anticipation, Michael was officially discharged from the hospital. Jake and Emma helped him into the car, each of them holding their breath as if afraid the moment might vanish. As they drove away from the hospital, Michael stared out the window, his eyes wide with wonder, as if seeing the world anew. The drive was quiet, filled with the comfortable silence of relief. Jake glanced at Michael in the rearview mirror, smiling softly at the look of awe on his son's face. Emma reached over, placing a hand on Jake's, and they shared a look of profound gratitude and pride. When they arrived home, Michael hesitated at the front door, his hand resting on the handle. He looked back at his parents, his expression a mix of excitement and trepidation. Can I really go in?" he asked, his voice soft. Jake chuckled, moving to stand beside him. "Of course, buddy. This is your home. You're free to go anywhere you want." Michael pushed open the door, stepping inside as he took in every detail. The familiar scent, the soft light filtering through the windows, the framed family photos on the walls. His eyes lingered on each memory, and Jake could see how much this moment meant to him. "It's strange," Michael murmured, running a hand over the back of the couch, feeling the fabric between his fingers. "I never realized how much I missed this, just being here." Emma wrapped an arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "You're home, Michael, and you're safe. We're going to make new memories together, starting right here." Michael nodded, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when things were really hard." Jake moved closer, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "We never once thought about giving up. You taught us what it means to be strong, Michael. You gave us the courage to face everything." They spent the evening together, savoring each moment. Jake and Emma cooked dinner while Michael sat at the kitchen counter, watching them with a soft smile. Every small action, the sound of chopping vegetables, the sizzle of the pan, the warmth filling the kitchen, felt like a precious treasure, a reminder of the life they had fought to preserve. As they sat down to eat, Jake raised his glass, his voice filled with emotion. "To Michael, for showing us the true meaning of resilience, and for teaching us the power of family." Emma raised her glass as well, her eyes brimming with tears. "And to Jake, for being the kind of father who stands by his family no matter what." Michael blushed, laughing softly. "You guys are embarrassing me." Jake chuckled, clinking glasses with him. "Get used to it, kiddo. We're not letting you go that easily." After dinner, they settled into the living room, where Jake and Emma shared stories of their childhoods, the little details that had shaped who they were. Michael listened intently, laughing at the funny moments, his eyes widening at the surprising ones. For the first time, he felt like he was learning who his parents really were, not just as his mom and dad, but as people. Later, as the night grew quiet and the house settled into a peaceful stillness, Michael turned to Jake, his voice soft. "Dad, do you think everything we went through was worth it?" Jake felt the weight of the question, his heart swelling with emotion as he looked at his son. "Yes, Michael, every single moment. because it brought us here, together. It made us stronger, and I wouldn't change a thing." Michael nodded thoughtfully, a small smile on his lips. "Me neither. It was hard, but I think I understand now. You don't really know how strong you are until you have to be." Jake pulled him into a hug, his arms wrapping around him with a fierce protectiveness. "Exactly, buddy. And you're the strongest person I know. You've taught us so much, more than you could ever imagine." Emma joined them, her arms wrapping around both of them as they held each other, their breaths steady, hearts beating in unison. In that quiet embrace, they felt the weight of everything they had endured and the lightness of finally being free from it. As they sat together, Jake felt a profound peace settle over him. He had faced every challenge, every fear, and in the end, he had found something far more valuable than any success or power. He had found his family, strong and whole. The next morning dawned bright and calm, filling the house with a gentle warmth that felt like a blessing. Jake stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the world outside with a peaceful sense of contentment. He felt the weight of the past months lifting, replaced by a quiet pride and gratitude that he could scarcely put into words. As he brewed a pot of coffee, Michael shuffled into the kitchen, still sleepy but smiling as he rubbed his eyes. He moved to the table, pulling out a chair and sitting down, watching his father with a look of calm joy. "Good morning, buddy," Jake greeted, his voice soft with affection. "How did you sleep?" Michael stretched, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Better than I have in a long time. It's weird, but I think I feel more alive now than ever before." Jake nodded, pouring a cup of coffee for himself and a glass of orange juice for Michael. "Sometimes going through the hardest times teaches us to really appreciate what we have. You've been through more than most people will ever understand. And yet, here you are, stronger than ever." Michael sipped his juice, his eyes thoughtful. "I used to be afraid of so much, of losing everything, of not being good enough. But now, I feel like I don't have to be afraid. I have you and Mom, and that's enough." Just then, Emma entered, her smile bright as she took in the sight of Jake and Michael sitting together, their faces calm and content. She moved to join them, resting her hand on Michael's shoulder. "Is this a private meeting, or can anyone join?" she teased, her eyes twinkling with warmth. Jake chuckled, pulling a chair out for her. "Always room for you, Em. I was just telling Michael how proud I am of him, and how grateful I am for everything we've built together." Emma reached across the table, taking both of their hands. "We did this together. We've all grown in ways we never expected, and I think maybe this was what we needed to find each other again, to understand what family really means." Michael nodded, his eyes misting slightly. "I used to think family was just who you're related to, but now I know it's about who's there for you, who never lets go, even when things get really hard." Jake felt his throat tighten, his voice thick with emotion as he replied, "That's right, Michael. And no matter what happens, we're here. Always. We're stronger than any challenge we've faced, and we'll keep facing them together." They sat in silence for a while, the depth of their shared experiences resonating in the quiet moments. It was a peace they had fought for, one they would hold on to, no matter what the future held. In that silence, each of them felt a sense of closure, knowing that the hardships they had endured had brought them closer than they ever could have imagined. After breakfast, they decided to go outside, breathing in the crisp morning air as they walked through the neighborhood together, each step a reminder of the freedom and joy they had reclaimed. They laughed, shared stories, and made plans for the future, their voices filled with a lightness that had been absent for so long. As they rounded the corner, Michael looked up at Jake, a question in his eyes. "Dad, do you think, maybe one day, I could help people the way you and Mom helped me? Maybe tell my story, or find a way to give back?" Jake placed a hand on his son's shoulder, pride evident in his gaze. "I think that's a beautiful idea, Michael. You've been through so much, and your story could give hope to so many people. You'd be helping them see that there's always light, even in the darkest times." Emma smiled, her voice soft and full of love. "And we'll be right here, supporting you in whatever you choose to do, just like you've supported us." Michael looked between his parents, a deep sense of peace settling within him. Thank you for everything. I feel like I have a purpose now. Like all of this happened for a reason. Jake nodded, his heart swelling with pride. Sometimes, life puts us through things we don't understand at the moment. But looking back, we see how those experiences shape us, make us stronger. And now, we're stronger together, as a family. They continued walking, each step forward a testament to the resilience they had cultivated, the love that had sustained them, and the future that awaited them. As we reach the end of this powerful journey, let's reflect on what we've witnessed. Jake, Emma, and Michael remind us that real strength doesn't come from wealth, power, or manipulation. Instead, it comes from the unwavering love and unity of family. In choosing each other over hollow promises, they showed us that facing our fears and holding on to what's truly important will always lead us to a better place. In our own lives, we're often tempted by shortcuts or promises that seem to offer quick solutions. But maybe, just maybe, the harder path, one filled with patience, love, and resilience, is the one that truly brings us peace and fulfillment. Let's remember to stay close to those who matter most and to protect our relationships from anything that tries to pull us apart. If this story touched you, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and join us as we continue to explore stories of courage, love, and redemption.